Welcome to the Politics and Media Show with me, John Rees. The BBC's Director General Mark Thomspon has suggested that broadcasters feel extra pressure to cover certain faiths more carefully than others. He said producers were faced with the possibility of violent threats instead of normal complaints if they broadcast certain types of satire depicting religion. He argued that faiths like Islam, which has a very close identity with ethnic minorities, and as a result were covered in a way more careful than they would be if they were not associated with such communities. He made the comments in an interview posted online for the Free Speech Debate, a research project at Oxford University. Now, before I introduce this week's guests, let's take a look at some of that interview.
You know, for a Muslim, a depiction, particularly a comic or demeaning depiction of the Prophet Muhammad, might have the force, the emotional force, of a piece of grotesque child pornography. And one of the mistakes secularists make is, I think, not to understand the character of what blasphemy feels like to someone who is a realist in their religious belief.
If your starting point is that the intensity of the feelings of those affected, then that almost invites...
Are a consideration, I think, and a consideration rather than a complete sort of joker that is played.
But it is an ace, isn't it? A rather nasty ace. If people say, "I feel so strongly about that. If you say it or broadcast it, I will kill you."
Well, clearly, it's a very noticeable move in the game. I mean, without question, you know, I complain in the strongest possible terms is different from I complain in the strongest possible terms, and I'm loading my AK-47 as I write. There's definitely raises the stakes. But I think there's two or three things going on. So manifestly, solicitation or a threat to murder, which by the way is quite rightly a crime. It's a crime. Massively raises the stakes. And
what, if I may just interrupt for a moment, what other areas in your experience, your great experience as a broadcaster, have you experienced threats of violence, threats to murder?
Well, the coverage of Israel-Palestine and one or two other conflicts in the world can lead to, and have in my case led to, threats of violence, yeah. In other words, editorial decision-making where someone's come to believe that you are not doing it fairly, or maybe likely not to do it fairly. I've been threatened once or twice in my career about one or two major conflicts, which have some of the same features. A sense of victimhood, a sense of conspiracy, you know, conspiracists who believe everyone else is conspiracists and so forth, and a sense of that the desperation of the circumstance means that the normal rules don't apply. But I also want to say, though, that the thing about religion, and I think it's very different to talk about Christianity in the United Kingdom, a very broadly, literally established, but also metaphorically established part of our kind of cultural built landscape. A religion which is actually, for all sorts of reasons, in many ways, a lot of our thinking about human rights comes out of the Christian tradition. I would argue a pretty broad-shouldered religion, compared to religions which have a very, in the UK, have a very close identity with ethnic minorities, where, you know, it's not as if, as it were, Islam is randomly spread across the UK population. It's almost entirely a religion practiced by people who may already feel, in other ways, isolated, prejudiced against, and where they may well regard an attack on their religion as racism by other means. And although it would be nice for the argument to elegantly separate religion out and say, no, religion is it's about propositions about belief, and it's got a different category. Again, at a kind of ontical level, it's completely bound up with identity, and in particular racial identity. And the idea that you might want to not just...
In the studio to discuss this is Sheikh Suliman Ghani of Tooting Islamic Centre, and on the phone we have George Pitcher, an Anglican priest and former religious affairs correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. Sheikh, just let me put this point to you. Do you think that Mark Thomspon is correct when he says that that there's a greater propensity to make violent threats from some religions, and I think he means Islam, than from others?
I think if you look at it from the perspective of the Muslim, there will be, if, for example, when a personality like the Prophet Muhammad is being depicted in a way which goes against the emotional feelings of every Muslim. Why? I don't think it is going to bring any violence or any that issue, but what is going to bring people become emotional, and not many people are able to control the emotions. Given that we have a very strong tradition, and that is the requirement of every Muslim, to express a very deep love for the Prophet Muhammad, as well as all of the other prophets that came before him. So if I give you a saying of the Prophet, he himself is saying that none of you can be true and just in his claim of love for me until the love he has for me is more than the love he has for his father, for his son, and for all of the people. Now, if somebody loves his father, he loves so much so, will you tolerate that somebody swear against your father or somebody pass derogatory statements against him? So what may happen, not many of a Muslim will able to control their emotions. So that is why there may be a reaction. But at the end of it, I mean, we all understand very clearly that God Almighty, the Creator, has already elevated the status of the prophets. And He Himself has already described the Prophet Muhammad as that, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, that we have a very high standard of character. So it's not in any way going to bring harm to the Prophet himself. It's like the poet when he says, مَا لِجُرْحٍ بِالْمَيْتِ إِلَامٌ. If somebody has passed away and you try and inflict pain on him, it's not going to bring any more pain to him. But what is going to happen is that every Muslim is connected to the religion, and especially with Islam, because the religion is still very vibrant, and people have not lost their attachment and connection with the Quran, especially also given that the Quran says there is for you in the messenger of the Prophet an excellent example. So will it cause an outrage and uproar? There will be lots of Muslim, because I mean you are looking at on a global level. Once there is a stir in one part of the world, and that will start escalating, as we had seen what had happened in Afghanistan with the burning of the Quran.
George Pigeon, let me bring you in on this. Do you think that Mark Thomspon was making a fair point when he said that perhaps people who practice one religion rather than another are more likely to make violent threats if it's depicted in ways which they find offensive?
Well, I think that Mark Thomspon is making two separate points here, John, and I think we should sort of unpack them and pay separate attention to the 2 points. I think he seems to be suggesting, firstly, that there is a greater threat of violence from particular minority religions than from others. And I think that's very dangerous territory, because it's rather like Hazel Blears when she was Communities Secretary a couple of years ago in the previous government, well, more than a couple of years ago, obviously, when she was pressed as to why the government was investing so much more time and resources and indeed finance in its efforts to address the Muslim youth as distinct from any other youth in the country. And her reply to that, I thought rather thoughtlessly, was, well, of course we're paying more attention to Muslim youth in the UK because they're more likely to be radicalised. And I think that is deeply patronising to our Muslim population in this country. It does, by definition, seem to imply that that a Muslim youth, every Muslim youth in the country, if you like, is a potential person of violence, is a potential terrorist, in fact, which I think is deeply offensive and patronising to the Muslim community. Secondly, though, I think that the other point that Mark Thomspon seeks to make is that and he said this about guessing about 3 years ago in a debate, and so he's repeating it again. It caused quite a stir last time he said it, when he was saying that he thought that Christianity and Christians in the UK needed less protection than minority groups, and I'm with him on that, actually. I don't think majorities need, established majorities, if you like, need the same degree of protection as minorities, simply because minorities are likely to feel and indeed be more vulnerable in society than the majority. And frankly, I think Christians complaining that they're victimised is very often absurd in this country. We have an established Church of England. The monarch is supreme governor of the Church of England. It's our national faith and our national religion is well represented in Parliament and all that sort of thing. And the idea that we can be, that we can claim that we are persecuted in the same way as sometimes our minority faiths feel persecuted is absurd. And I think we do have to be more careful and more sensitive to minorities, simply because minorities are going to feel rather more threatened by some elements of the majority.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that last point and the second point that you raised there, because I think that is an interesting point. But just staying with the first point that Mark Thomspon made, perhaps the more contentious point, he seemed at one point to acknowledge, or at least to say that there were other causes where broadcasters, and he said he personally had been threatened, was over political issues. He mentioned Israel-Palestine, but he seemed to disconnect this from the question of the Muslim identity. But in actual fact, of course, these things are bound together. Before the war on terror, there was very little talk of this kind of thing. Since the war on terror, which many Muslims feel is directed specifically or in part specifically at them, this kind of reaction is more common. So it's bound up with international politics. It's not simply a question of certain religions have this capacity and certain religions don't, is it?
No, I think one needs to be honest and acknowledge that there are particular threats in society. I think it's that when you start to generalise, as Hazel Blears did rather thoughtlessly, I think, and in the last government, and rather, Mark Thomspon is a very much more thoughtful person when it comes to matters of religion and indeed interfaith politics and relationships. So I'm slightly surprised that he should generalise in that kind of way. But you're absolutely right that we do need a certain degree of candour, I think, about meeting a threat of terrorism, and that's why it is a little absurd, again, that security at airports has to stop little old ladies as often as it does youthful Asians. There is a profile to a violent terrorist threat, and that should be addressed, and we should be honest about that. But I think we just need to apply these kind of things with intelligence and sensitivity, because if then we're to say, well, if we stop every young Asian at an airport, that's the way forward, I think that clearly is not treating the situation with sensitivity and intelligence.
Okay, well, just let me bring Sheikh Suliman back in on this question a moment. Sheikh, to take this debate out of the international and political context is to fail to understand what's really going on, surely.
Yeah, I mean, for the believer, the whole political condition of all of the people wherever they are, for example, the Muslim in general, if anything happens in one part of the world, it does have an effect on the Muslim life in another part of the world. We cannot disconnect ourselves in what is happening, for example, in what happened in Libya, in Iraq, and now in Syria, and Palestine also. So whatever is happening there directly affects the people who are living here in the UK. Because a Muslim is that person who needs and he has to have a certain sense of connection and brotherhood, which needs to be engendered. And this is from the teaching of the Quran. So yes, indeed, Islam, it does highlight the importance of living and coexisting with other communities, tolerating other people, their faiths, their belief. And that is what we witnessed there in Jerusalem, an open land, open city. But rightly, and you have clearly indicated that the condition of a people in any other part of the world, how policies have been applied for them, and then at the same time, we feel that you are also under the same policy because the condition, the Quran informs us that إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, all of the believers are brothers unto each another. So that is the reason why a Muslim, he would definitely have a feeling in his heart. He will feel the sadness, he will feel the grief, he will feel the pain, the suffering. When he sees certain policies being applied, affecting the lives of a Muslim in a distant land, even though he has never met him, he has never seen him. And hence, I would say it seems as if though there are certain policies that may be affecting only the Muslim way of life. It seems that it may look like it's a general, but indirectly it does affect the life of a Muslim. And I think the Muslim is very clear that when these things happen to him, there is a very important verse of the Holy Quran which shows us that وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ أَلَا أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا اِعْدِلُوا هُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Even though they may be people, they may be personalities, not all, you will always find a group of people, they will harbor hatred against you, meaning the people who are following the faith, people who are following the life that they have, the life or the way of the Muslim. You will find that they will come under a certain type of attack, whether it is in the media, whether in different ways, whether it is also this ongoing unjust wars. But the hatred of a people should not make you yourself become criminals, that we change our way and then we also become criminals. We try, you have something like revenge way. That is not what Islam teaches. Islam always says, i'dilu, establish justice. That is what is more closer to piety, more closer to becoming God consciousness. And that is the beautiful teaching. So even though there may be a war that is ongoing, it can never be an unjust war. There has to be follow certain criteria so that at the end of it, ultimately, is that all people can live in harmony.
Just let me talk a little bit about the other point that Mark Thomspon made, and George Pitcher referred to it, when he said that this is often, criticism of Islam is often received or understood to be, I think his phrase, Mark Thomspon's phrase, was racism by other means. And that actually is a valuable point, isn't it? Because, there may be in this, there are no doubt, some Muslims who are white, and there are some Muslims who are rich. But by and large, Muslims in this country are not white and poor, and so there is a social position. And when the religion is insulted, it's being received by people who are being discriminated against for other reasons, and therefore it's different than when you criticise the mainstream church.
Yeah, this is at the end of it, you will always find what is the. If you take the life of a Muslim, whether he is a rich person, whether he is a poor person, whatever his color, the whole, the example is in the Hajj itself. It promotes racial harmony. The example is in the prayer. So when the Muslim is praying, they stand together in one line. Whatever the color is, black, white, whatever the language, that is promoting the racial harmony. So if a Muslim is really true and just in his claim and his love for the Prophet Muhammad, then there would not be any distinction from the rich, from the poor. All will need to join, stand shoulder to shoulder. And hence, when a certain attack comes on the Muslim, whether it is from the media, how should the Muslim behave? I think this is where it can become an issue on how it is being addressed. The Muslim now needs to behave intelligent. Because there are certain times, when you have somebody wants to provoke you, then you will find elements in the community. They know that this is what is the teaching. God Almighty, He may prefer some over others in wealth. He may give somebody another blessing. So every person has it because that in itself is a test. So he is put into a test. And God, the Creator, is looking as to how he is behaving with all of these blessings. So when somebody provokes him, how does he behave? If he behaves and he controls himself, he suppresses his anger, he does not let his emotional take over him, he thinks with his heart also, and that is how he will address the issue, and hence to have a discussion and to make matters clear why the Muslim becomes sensitive. So you cannot generalize the whole thing. What happens with the media? They may take few individuals, and that may be portrayed and relayed, and that becomes the focal point, as if though this is the general behavior of all of the Muslims in one community. Okay.
Let me just bring George Pitcher back in for a last comment there, because you raised it before, and it is a valuable point, and a point not very often made about the different social locations, so to say, of different religions in British society.
Yes, absolutely. I think Mark Thomspon does have a point there. I think that certainly religious conviction or claims of victimization on both sides of the debate is used to cloak a much darker, visceral kind of racism that's going on. I mean, a lot of the internet traffic about the threat to our culture of being overrun by Islam, which is a little quieter now for a reason I'll come to in a moment. But a lot of that has been around in the media, and all it really is a kind of closet, thinly disguised racism. I mean, what it's really doing is trying to dress up racism in the respectability of some sort of cultural observance of a changing demographic in Europe, which is, is arithmetical nonsense apart from anything else, because the Muslim population is so small in this country and indeed across Europe. I think Baroness Warsi had it about right when she said about a year ago that Islamophobia was passing the kind of dinner party test, and I think that's wrapped up in what Mark Thomspon is now saying. There is a kind of casual racism amongst middle-class white people in this country aimed at Islam, and it really has much of the kind of undertow, in my view, of the casual kind of anti-Semitism that existed in this country in the 1930s before the Second World War, and we need to keep a very close eye on that.
Okay, well, George, I'm going to have to bring you to a close there because we've run out of time. I'd like to thank George Pitcher and Sheikh Suliman Ghani for participating in that discussion. We'll be back in a few moments with part 2, which will be discussing International Women's Day. Welcome back to the Politics and Media Show. Later this week, International Women's Day will be marked by events across the globe. Every year, on March the 8th, thousands of events take place to mark the economic, political and social achievements of women. This year, Connecting Girls, Inspiring Futures is the theme. Now in the studio to discuss the day and her own contribution is the author Sufiya Ahmed, and on the phone we have Lydia Frempong, who's one of the PR organisers for the day. Lydia, let me come to you first. So what's important and what's different about the theme for this International Women's Day? Hi Lydia, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi Lydia.
Can you hear me okay?
Just explain to me what the importance of this year's International Women's Day is and what the importance of this year's theme is.
The importance of International Women's Day is always just to highlight the celebration of women, but also to highlight the inequalities that are still there, that still prevail. This year, the theme has been Connecting Girls, Inspiring Futures, because it's all about connecting women and women and girls together to make the campaign larger, creating greater opportunities for girls, education, equality for young girls as well. So that's the difference this year.
And do you think it's important that the sort of the radical origins of International Women's Day are remembered? After all, I think it was started in 1910, wasn't it, on the initiative of the Socialist International by Clara Zetkin and other very radical women's rights organisers. Do you think that's diminished, or do you think that impact is still there?
I believe it's probably still there, but with internationalwomensday.com, what we're here, the main reason that internationalwomensday.com is here, it started in 2001. It was founded by Glenda Stone, and it was all about increasing the awareness and activity of all the events that take place worldwide. So that's what we stick to. Lots of different organisations have different themes. The UN theme is all.
So just give us a flavour of some of the things that you're aware of that are going to be taking place over the next on March the 8th. Hi,
Hello?
Lydia? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Sorry, this is cutting.
Yeah, just give us a flavour of some of the events that you know are going to be taking place on the day.
Yeah, you've got On the Bridge, which is happening at London Bridge. You've got Annie Lennox, who's a supporter of We Are Equals. That event is happening. You've on the International Women's Day website, lots of other events are being listed. There's talks happening, for example, in Esher, in Sandown Racecourse. You've got the Esher Chamber of Commerce coming together with women, discussing women and their empowerment and what they can do finding job opportunities. But then you've also got Reese Witherspoon as well. She's the face of Avon, so she's now released from jury for International Women's Day. And then you have Kristen Davis, the actress. She's now supporting Oxfam. So lots of events are happening around the world. Every single bridge around the world, there's an event that's happening. So there's Join Me on the Bridge. It's happening in USA and in Boston, Massachusetts. Over here, as we say, is in London Bridge. In USA, San Francisco, every single bridge around the world, there's going to be some sort of walk happening to highlight this day.
Brilliant. And do you think that although there's been dramatic changes over the years since the first International Women's Day in 1910, do you think there's still a sense in which the majority of working women are still excluded from full exercise of rights? After all, I mean, in this country, I think there's women's wages are still only 3/4 of men's wages. I mean, there's a layer of working women who have been left out even from the gains that perhaps some middle class women have made.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does still exist, and I think that's why this day's a very important day, because it's to show the highlight, to show the changes, the progression from when International Women's Day first began to where we are now. But the work still has to continue. There still has to be equality. There still has to be fairness. There still needs to be women in the boardroom, and there still needs to be equality for all women at all levels to be able to progress and have equality in life. So that's why it's very important for a day like this to continue.
OK, well, Lydia, thanks very much. Let me bring in my studio guest. It's Sufiya Ahmed. She's the author of this book, The Secrets of the Henna Girl. Sufiya, tell me first, what do you say in the book that you think fits in with the message of International Women's Day?
Well, the book, Secrets of the Henna Girl, follows the story of a 16-year-old girl called Zeba, who is being forced into a marriage she doesn't want. And the book is really it's an empowering tale. It's about how she actually finds the courage to get out of these plans. And I think that fits in with International Women's Day because, International Women's Day is all about empowerment. It's all about women's rights, girls' rights. And it's about the struggle as well. You're not going to get away from situations just like that. You can't rely on other people. You have to find the courage within yourself to find a situation out.
And when it came to writing and getting a publisher for the book, do you think you had a harder battle than you might have done if you were a man?
I don't know how to answer that.
I suppose it's an unanswerable question in a certain sense, but
well, the book covers a girls' issue. Lots of teenage, more girls read books than boys do at that teenage market. My publishers are Puffin, and they were very, very interested in the story, and they were more interested because I sold it as a book that was about empowerment. They didn't want to put anything out there that was about another Asian woman just being a victim. It was about this British girl who finds the courage to get out of a situation she doesn't want to be in.
And how do you feel about the fact that these issues are often raised by people who want to see women as victims? And I mean, famously, in the case of the invasion of Afghanistan, this was the story that governments told in order to justify a military intervention. And their take on it certainly wasn't your take, that the people themselves could deal with this issue.
I might be a bit controversial here. I don't think Afghanistan's women have the rights that are afforded them by the religion of Islam. I think I think they are treated like second-class citizens. Whether the fact that the Americans used it to justify the war, that was their strategy. But I think there is the issue there that a lot of work needs to be done to raise women's rights in Afghanistan.
I guess my point was really about whether the women themselves have the capabilities of doing that, because there are very, very powerful. Malalaya Joya, the MP, for instance, the Afghan woman MP, a very, very powerful voice, and many women's organisations that are addressing this for themselves. They hardly look like a group of women who really need a lot of help to address what are, I think everybody acknowledges, very serious problems.
I think what women need is support. That you need the funding there. You need mentors there. You need role models there. It's a completely different country to how this country is. In terms of the issue of forced marriage, for British people, for British victims. There's a lot of support. There's NGOs, there's charities. The Foreign Office have a forced marriage unit. So when I say that a girl can find the courage, there are people that she can turn to, but it's about finding the courage to ask for that help. With Afghanistan's women, I mean, you've got some strong women at the elite of society, if you like, but the majority are poor, very, very poor women in a very sort of patriarchal society, and I think poverty needs to be addressed there.
Well, let's talk about that. How do you think that the issue of women's rights intersects with those questions of poverty and inequality in the society? Because it makes a big difference about how powerful you feel to deal with that if you're in a relatively secure place in the society than if you're in a much weaker place, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, poverty is what stops you from gaining so many things that you can do in your life. Middle-class women, you mentioned that point earlier, that some of the more working-class women have lower wages than men do in that sector, but some of the middle-class women might not. It's about lobbying for, what you can gain. It's such a broad issue. I don't know where to start.
And what are you thinking now? Do you think of yourself as a writer about women's issues, or was it just that you wrote about this in this novel, and maybe in other places and other times you'll write about other things?
This was an issue that I felt very passionately about, more so because of the way Muslim women are portrayed in the media. Forced marriages, you'll find that all the time in newspapers like The Independent, The Telegraph, The Daily Mail always seems to have a feature about the latest victim. And what they always hint at in the stories is that it's something that Muslim men do because their religion tells them that they should do it. And I completely disagree with that. I believe in the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, which says that you have to get the consent of the Virgin before you marry her. No one seems to be aware of this in any of the media when they're talking about this. And what I do in the book, and this was really important, and I made it clear to my publishers that it was something that I didn't want diluted in any way, was that the book had to portray that Islam was not the demonising force in this. Islam was not the one who was pushing for this girl to be victimised. Actually, some of the strongest characters in the books is the Imam, who is against it because he's saying that this is not permitted in the religion, that a forced marriage is actually not a valid marriage because you need the consent of the girl before it can be in the nikah. So that was really important for me, for the religion not to be demonised. And what I would love is for any non-Muslim, a non-Muslim that reads it, I would love for them to walk away from the book and think, actually, it's not their religion, it's just plain old misogyny.
And I mean, how much feedback do you get from readers? And is that a reaction that you've had from non-Muslims?
Yeah, the book was only released on 1st March, a few days ago, book day, but we've had some reviews out. And we've had some, non-Muslim women reviewing it, and they have said that, it's really clear that Islam is not the factor. The writer makes that clear, and I do have a sense that's a revelation to them, that they're actually mentioning it. And the media is responsible for so much of what people believe in this country about Muslims, and I think sometimes you just need to put your own version of what you believe out there.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the striking things about the Muslim community in this country is that it does have a very large number of actually powerful and effective women spokesmen. I mean, whether or not you agree with their politics, from Baroness Warsi to Salma Yaqub, it's a fairly wide spectrum of politics that do have forceful Muslim women in it, and that doesn't seem to penetrate into the mainstream culture.
But I think politicians like Baroness Warsi and Salma Yaqub, I have great respect for both of them. There are only so many battles that you can fight. Baroness Warsi is the chair of the Conservative Party. She's got more pressing issues on. She might talk about the issue, she might mention it, but it's just one little, it's probably something personal to her that she might want to mention. And Salma has her own politics.
Yeah, my point was more that although those people exist in politics, and although they're very highly visible in politics, the old stereotype goes on, even though the evidence to the contrary is in front of people's eyes, or at least in front of the media's and the journalists' eyes. I mean, it's a mark of how persistent the stereotype is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you see powerful Muslim women on screen, I don't think people make the connection between them and the masses. They just see them as the exception to the rule, people who have broken out, if you like, which is just another form of Islamophobia, I think.
So, and did you say that with the publisher that you were insistent that this message wasn't going to be diluted? It's a big publisher, Puffin. Was there any discussion about that, or were they happy that that was going to be the case?
Oh, no, they were completely happy with it. I had a couple of points I wanted to make. The first one was that I didn't want it to be about the transfer of ownership. Also, again, when you've got an issue like forced marriage, in the media you've always had stories put out there, or even programmes made, where the Asian girl decides that she wants to leave her Asian parents, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, and run off with a white boyfriend, if you like. I didn't want to trivialise the whole subject of the forced marriage. For me, it was a case of it's a woman's right, it's a girl's right to choose who she wishes to be married to, and it's not about leaving one set of owners, your parents, for another owner, a partner. It was just a case of she just wanted to exist as she does, and a right afforded to her as a Muslim by the Prophet Muhammad.
And did you, when you were writing the book, did you talk to a lot of women who'd been in this circumstance? Were the characters based on experiences that you'd been told about, and people you discussed it with?
I attended a lot of meetings in the House of Parliament. We had a lot of women activists who were speaking out against forced marriages quite a few years ago, and that's where my interest really stemmed from. So I did speak to, they would call themselves survivors of forced marriage. They've made it, they're speaking out against the issue, trying to get more support for potential future victims. Yeah, I mean, the theme is always the same. The parents were loving, and then they decided that in the name of honour and their obligation to the extended family, they would put that obligation over parental love. In some situations, some daughters have never returned to their parents if they've left their marriages. But I think in the majority of cases, there's always that reconciliation. The parents do actually realise that, their daughter's not happy and that is their child. And they do come back round, and there is a lot of reconciliation. And that's also something that I really touch on in the book. I didn't want the character to go off. I mean, she's in a refuge for a long time, but I didn't want her to go off and just live off this new life, alienated from her community, from her faith. It's a case of how the parents also come round to the idea that actually, they become more educated in the religion and realise that the religion forbids it, and then parental love comes first.
And over the time that you've obviously been researching it and looking at this question, do you think things are moving in the right direction, or do you think it's still as bad as it was? How would you...
I think things are improving. When I first came across it myself, it was about 7 years ago when I came across it in Parliament. I think so. I think that there's also a lot of effort made now by certain mosques who, their imams are speaking out as well. I know that in Bradford, the local councillors, along with one of the Foreign Office ministers, invited the Mufti of Kashmir. So you actually have, this scholar from another country. Fine, you have that connection with the heritage, but he came over and he addressed this town hall, and the meeting was all about, you can't force your children. That is not a valid marriage if the consent is not there. You wouldn't have had that even 5 years ago. So the fact that the men, the Muslim men, your scholars, the councillors, the people making an effort as community leaders are putting it out there, I think people are realising that it's a cultural practice and they really shouldn't be doing it.
And yet something like that, which, as you say, is quite remarkable in many ways, that's not a story in the press, whereas... Yeah,
well, it made it to the local paper, but didn't make it to the Nationals now.
Yeah. So do you think there's a lot more that could be done in terms of actually publicising the work and the messages that the kind of people you're talking about now are making in the community? That needs to get into the press, doesn't it?
Well, for the rest of the country to realise that all Asian women are victims, yeah, it'd be great if they wrote about that. But I think more pressing is that the education and the awareness is given to those people that are doing it in the first place. That's the most important thing. And I think if you stick to promoting the fact that it's forbidden in the religion, because they don't seem to realise that unless you've got the consent, that's not a valid marriage. In the eyes of God. So as long as that's promoted, I think it can come to an end. But again, it's still a relatively young immigrant community. We've been here 3-4 decades, and some people still have that connection with their heritage in Pakistan or Bangladesh, and they have their reasons for wanting to arrange these marriages, but they're actually forcing them.
Well, that's all that we've got time for this week. I'd like to thank my guests in this half of the programme, Lydia Frimpong and Sufiya Ahmed, for joining us. Hope you found that interesting and enlightening discussion, and that you'll be looking out for the events on International Women's Day itself. That's the 8th of March. Until next week, keep watching.